to be conscious of your anger and be clear about who or what you're angry about, right? Because often, if we're stuffing our anger, we're angry about one situation and it comes out somewhere else, right? We're angry about something at work and it comes out at home, and we blow up at our kids and then we feel bad about that. Well, part of the issue is our anger's coming out on someone other than the situation we're angry about or the person we're angry with.
Welcome to the Crucible Project Podcast. The Crucible Project is a nonprofit organization committed to creating a world of men and women who live with integrity, grace, and courage, helping them to fulfill their God-given purpose. This podcast will discuss important and sometimes difficult topics while delivering practical life applications with men and women who are currently practicing this work. We are igniting Christ-like change in men and women through experiences of radical honesty and grace.
Well, Bob, it's great to have you on the podcast today. Welcome.
Oh, thanks, Tim. Happy to be here.
Yeah, so we're going to be talking about anger today. And I guess one of the basic questions that we need to answer, or that I'd like you to answer, is what is anger and why do we struggle with it so much? What is it?
So anger is our response to injustice, to our boundaries being violated, to when we are confronted with obstacles that block us from getting what we want. It's our response to those situations where we feel like something is not right, and so we become angry. I think we struggle with it so much because few of us saw any positive models of it being handled well. Not in our personal lives, not in movies and television and whatnot. And so we just don't know how to positively handle and use our anger. So we struggle with it.
That makes sense. The fact of something gets in the way and we react with anger. So it sounds too, because it's so difficult, I've noticed that people tend to consider anger one of the quote unquote bad emotions. And why do we consider it bad?
Yeah, I think again, that goes back to the way we've seen it used and handled, often in harmful ways, hurtful ways, perhaps out of control, abusive ways. Again, both in our personal lives and in TVs and movies, we see people blowing up, hurting other people. And so because of the way we've seen it misused, we think the emotion itself is bad.
So if we see, that makes a lot of sense. If we see this modeled from, I'm guessing, as children, is that why, do you think that's why some people end up replicating it, like blowing up with anger? Or what about the people that grew up in a situation where there was an angry parent or angry person around them, but they don't seem to get angry at all? They don't seem to have any anger.
Yeah, my experience has been people will often go one of two ways in those kinds of situations. One, if they take the lesson, if you will, that getting big and powerful with their anger is what you do to show that you're a man or show that you're powerful, is to let your anger out in hurtful ways and domineering ways and abusive ways. So they go that route, or they see people were hurt with anger, and so they decide, I'm not going to be angry, right? And I'm just going to stuff it. Now, I don't believe that works, but that's what they try to do.
So they're still angry. They just are not expressing it?
Right. They just stuff it. They try to stuff it down. They deny maybe to themselves that they're not angry. But we believe that you can't not feel those emotions. any emotions, including anger. And so if you try to stuff it, it will come out. It will leak out. And when it leaks out, you're not in control of it. And so it can leak out on people other than who you're angry with, right? Maybe you're angry at your boss, but you stuff that, you bring it home and it leaks out on your family. Or you turn it inward and it just leaks on yourself.
Oh, that's fascinating. So I can recognize the blow up anger, right? The powerful anger that you're talking about. What are some of the ways that it can leak out other than that explosive anger? What are some things if I was looking at somebody?
Yeah. So for me personally, I saw that blow up anger growing up from my parents, and made up my mind, and I wasn't even aware of this, that I wasn't going to be like that. And I tried to stuff my anger. And the way it most often came out for me when it leaked was it came out as sarcastic digs, sarcastic criticisms, right? And and this was a big way that I wounded my daughter when she was growing up, that led to our estrangement. She would do 99% on a test, and I'd have a little dig about the 1%. And I wasn't even really aware consciously that I was doing that. So that's a big way, is that it'll come out again, because you're not conscious of it and you're trying not to be angry, you end up hurting people with it. And sarcasm, putting people down, hypercriticalness, these are all ways that anger can come out unconsciously, leaking out.
Is that similar to passive aggressive behavior too, where somebody is just kind of passive aggressive about it?
Yep, that's a word for it, another flavor of that anger that's coming out in a sideways, in a leaking way, instead of a conscious, clean way. Yeah.
So how do I recognize anger within me? I mean, what is it that will allow me to be able to learn how to identify that I'm angry? If I have spent most of my life stuffing it down, shoving it down to not acknowledge it, what do I do?
Yeah. So a couple of things. One is, anger, as I said, is our response when we experience something that is not right. It's not the way it should be. So just being aware when you're confronted with that kind of situation, there's injustice. My experience of the world is there's lots of injustice. Well, an appropriate response to that is anger. So just being aware when you're in those situations that maybe what I'm feeling is anger. The other way is to pay attention to the physical sensations that are often associated with anger. We tend to carry our anger physically as a tenseness or tightness in our upper back and neck. Hence the phrase, that person's a pain in the neck. That's where that came from, because we carry our anger there. Or we are clenching our jaw. If your jaw is sore, that's a sign that you're carrying anger. Or or you find yourself just making a fist. That's another sign that you're carrying anger that maybe you're not even aware of.
So for me to be aware of the physical things that are going on in my body, to kind of observe and be aware, is a huge thing. Mm-hmm. I'm thinking of an example of, let's say I'm driving down the road and I get cut off by somebody and I get pissed. In fact, maybe I might make a sign to them that will show my anger. And I know that a lot of experts have said that sometimes anger is a secondary emotion to sadness or scare. What are your thoughts around what's going on with me, right? Because obviously that person cutting me off may or may not even know that they're cutting me off.
Sure.
What's your thoughts around that? I mean, is that real anger? Is that something else that's coming up for me?
Yeah, that can vary by person based on, again, their upbringing and what they learned about anger and the other, what what we might call difficult emotions, sadness and fear. And often it varies by gender. For men, and this is a broad stereotype, of course, so not always true.
Sure.
For men, often anger is more socially acceptable than fear or sadness. So
Really?
often men will feel anger as essentially a covering emotion instead of feeling their sadness and fear, because that's more acceptable, right? Men are supposed to be powerful, and anger can be thought of as a way to show your power. And so for men, often when they start looking at themselves and working on themselves, they need to work on their anger first before they can access their sadness and or fear. For women, often it's the opposite. For them, sadness is often more socially acceptable than anger. And so for women, they often experience their anger as sadness. And for them to be able to access their anger, they first need to work on that sadness, process through that before they can touch their anger. But that's all dependent on what you saw as you were growing up, both what you were taught and what you were shown, what you were modeled about those different feelings and how you handle them.
So it really makes sense to go back in time, right? And take a look at how anger was dealt with in my family of origin, me growing up, and then kind of taking a look at how I deal with anger, how, if it's the same or different, it sounds like.
Right. And I would say, look at the other difficult emotions too, right? Were you given messages like, big boys don't cry, right? Or there's nothing to be afraid of, right? And so you were taught that those emotions perhaps were not acceptable. And so for you, then maybe anger becomes that covering emotion.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense with women. And I know you're not the resident expert for women. We'll have women talk about anger too on a future podcast. But so what if for men, big boys don't cry is the message? Do you have any inkling, or have you spoken with women about the messages that they've gotten where they can't be angry? What messages that they've had to deal with?
Yeah, sometimes you'll see things like, don't take that tone with me, or go to your room till you have a better attitude, that kind of thing, right? So being angry, the message from the parent being, don't challenge my authority with your anger, right?
Sure.
And so now that could be for boys too. The other thing I would say is for those of us of the Christian faith, often anger is frowned upon. And so it may be for men who of the Christian faith that's a little bit different, that they are less likely to do that overt anger and probably more likely to do the stuffing it kind of anger because they're raised that way.
So let's talk about that. Is there a theology of anger? Like, how did Jesus use anger? How did he express anger? How did he model that for us to take a look at?
Yeah. So, and I'm not a theologian, but the couple things that I've come to believe that are taught in the Bible. The first, out of Ephesians chapter 4, it says, "Be angry, but do not sin. Do not let the sun go down while you're angry, and do not give the devil a foothold." So it seems to me what that passage is saying is that you do need to feel and respond to your anger, right? Be angry,
right?
But do not sin. And it's also warning us that if you're stuffing your anger, right? Don't let the sun go down on your anger. If you're stuffing it, that gives the devil a foothold to tempt you into misusing your anger.
Yeah.
Right. So that's one piece. The second piece is, when I look at Jesus's life, what he modeled, I see him modeling doing clean anger, right? When he saw what was going on in the temple courts with the money changers and those selling the animals, he was angry, it said, but he didn't blow up. He was deliberate. He made a whip of cords and he confronted that injustice. Now, the second piece of theology around this, I think that's important, is comes out of Ephesians 6:12, where Paul says, our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in heavenly realms, right? So the lesson there is no man is our enemy, right? So I think I think what the Bible is teaching there is you're not supposed to use your anger to hurt people, but to confront evil. And if you closely read the account of Jesus clearing the temple, there was no person hurt by his actions. Now, people probably got their feelings hurt, but he did not hurt people with his anger.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, in his interactions with different people, even the disciples, at times it seemed like he was somewhat angry that they weren't getting it, or obviously in his interaction with the teachers and the scribes, he seemed to be angry about the ways that they were misusing power. And it seems like he was expressing his anger in clean ways. And that is a thing I want to talk about in a second too, about how do we deal with it in clean ways. But I think the amazing thing is that anger is something that we need to get out. And you were talking before, Bob, about how the church, in some churches, it's kind of frowned upon. What is it about that that the church doesn't do a good job on with anger?
Well, and I don't want to bash the church, but I feel like because it's so easy for us to sin in our anger, that often the answer seems to be don't be angry, instead of what the Bible seems to be teaching, which is don't sin in your anger, right? Yeah. I have never heard a sermon on be angry, right? I've never heard a pastor teach that, even though it's clearly in Ephesians. It says be angry. Never heard a sermon on that. Now, there are also passages that say be slow to anger, and I agree with that, right? Jesus was very deliberate and controlled. So part of that is don't be ruled by your anger, right? That would not be biblical, right?
Yeah. Another thing that I've noticed with that is that there seems to be a lot of shame around the issue of anger, right? And how do we deal and express our anger that takes away that shame, that doesn't lead us into shame? And in a sense, this kind of leads into this other question too of what does it look like to, deal with your anger in a clean way?
Right. So a couple thoughts there. First is just to recognize and accept that anger is an emotion that is God-given. He wired it into us. And so it's not inherently bad or evil. It can be used for bad or evil, but it is not inherently bad or evil. Second step, I would say, is to be conscious of your anger and be clear about who or what you're angry about, right? Because often, if we're stuffing our anger, we're angry about one situation and it comes out somewhere else, right? We're angry about something at work and it comes out at home, and we blow up at our kids and then we feel bad about that. Well, part of the issue is our anger is coming out on someone other than the situation we're angry about or the person we're angry with. So that's the second piece. Be clear about what what is leading to our anger. The third then is to find a clear, righteous way to express our anger, right? Sometimes that is speaking directly to the person we're angry at. Other times we need to find a way to take action. Anger is our fuel, if you will, for action, for taking action. So if we're angry about some injustice we see, rather than just sit with that anger and let it stew, what is some action we can take to fight that injustice? Again, not hurting people, but fighting that situation that we're angry about. And that way we don't end up leaking out that anger somewhere else in our lives.
Yeah, that's a lot to unpack. So going back to that second step of really identifying what the anger is about, right? Like, so that feels like a lot of hard work to really be able to identify. So does that mean that, like you said, if something happened at work and I take it home to my family and take it out on them, where do I take that piece to, right? That anger about work. I mean, do I go to my family? Can I still share it with them cleanly as long as I clearly identify, hey, this is a work issue I'm experiencing? Or do I go to somebody else and talk with them about it, or both or?
Well, so ideally, if it's safe and appropriate, you would want to talk to the person you're angry at.
Okay.
Now, sometimes in a work situation that might not be safe or appropriate.
Right.
Then yes, finding someone you can process that anger with. Within Crucible Project, we'd often say do that in your group. If you're in one of our groups, that's an ideal place to process through anger, for you to feel your anger, to let it out in some ritual way that's not.
So you talked about clean ways, right? Using clean ways to express my anger. What are some clean ways to express my anger?
Well, sure. So as I said, one is just to have a direct conversation with the person that you're angry with, if that's safe and appropriate. Another way is to find some physical expression that you can that will allow you to feel those feelings of anger to completion, you might say. So that might be, right, that's not hurting anybody. Take a tennis racket and beat an old couch that you have, right? Or
Sure.
take a towel or a pillow and just twist on it and squeeze it till you can process through all your anger. We found that physical expression is often a really helpful way to help us process through, help us feel our feelings of anger. This is unfortunately why there's so much physical abuse that can happen when we're stuffing our anger, and it comes out, unconsciously. It'll often come out physically. So we encourage people to find safe physical outlets. Punch your punching bag if you have one, right?
Yeah. So, because anger is energy, right? Anger is this energy that I have in me, and that's why I have a hard time doing this clean, confrontational conversation with someone and saying, I'm angry with you, without, it feels like I'm holding back the energy that is in there. You know what I mean? Like, it's right. Do I go and beat a pillow before I talk with the person that I need to talk to? Whatever works, I guess, right?
Right.
Make it safe.
Perhaps, that you find some safe physical ritual, we would say, outlet for the anger energy, and then go confront the person around the issue of, injustice or whatever the issue is you're angry about. The other thing that I would say is often the feelings of anger we have toward a particular person in a particular situation turn out to be in part or maybe mostly about something else from our past. And the current situation is just an echo of that. We would call it a trigger. So maybe a comment my wife makes is reminding me of the way one of my parents used to criticize me. And I have some anger at my parents about that I've never processed. And so that anger comes out at my spouse. And so one of the pieces of getting conscious about my anger and who I'm angry at is to do that unpacking work of, well, is all this anger energy I feel about this situation really about this situation, or is it about some previous situation? I'll often ask the question when I'm working with someone in a group or in a coaching setting, does the level of anger, and this is true for sadness or fear as well, but does the level of anger you're experiencing seem appropriate, proportional to this situation, or does it feel like there's more anger than makes sense? If it's the latter, if there's more anger than makes sense, likely some of that anger is about something in the past, and this present situation is reminding you of that past situation.
So that's like and that's like getting cut off by a driver, right? Like I have no clue. Like I said earlier, I have no clue what that person did, if they were doing it on purpose or not. But obviously somewhere in my past, I've gotten cut off or interrupted or I guess taken advantage of in some other way. And so it comes out. It sounds like when you're talking about stuffing our anger down, that we kind of make deposits and put our anger in a bank. And then instead of in health, taking out these immediate withdrawals right away, we just kind of bank it away. And then all of a sudden we withdraw this huge amount that is inappropriate. Does that sound accurate?
Exactly. It's a volcano might be a good model. Some, like the one in Hawaii, just are constantly just leaking out their lava, right? So there's never a big explosion there, but others, Mount St. Helens are stuffing it, right, for hundreds of years, and then when it does come out, it explodes really violently.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that totally makes sense. That's a great analogy. So tell me, you alluded to sarcasm as your go-to, and that's been a big thing for me and my family, a lot of sarcasm of dealing with things. What's a personal story, if you're willing to share, around recognizing and dealing with your anger, that journey of dealing with your anger?
Sure. So growing up, my parents were stuffers. They didn't constructively express their anger. They would stuff and then they would explode. And typically that would end up with some kind of spanking that was involved with it. And so that was, and it was very scary, especially when I was really young, because they seemed, to me at least, out of control. In those moments, their anger was controlling them. They were not controlling their anger. One of my most vivid memories as a child is the dreaded wait till your father gets home, right? And sitting in my bedroom, waiting till my father came home from work so that he could issue the spanking. And he would have come home tired after a long day and have to confront this, and that would fuel his anger. And so I decided I wasn't going to be like that. And I just stuffed my anger, and never realizing that it was coming out unconsciously, it was leaking out in generally sarcastic, critical comments. This is one of the contributions I made to the breakdown of my first marriage, is not confronting situations head on, but stuffing them, and then these comments coming out. And it was part of what I contributed to the estrangement that I still am in with my daughter, that I would let these critical, sarcastic comments come out And I'd look back and not even sure why I said it.
Mm-hmm.
But I was angry about something else, maybe something with my spouse, something at work, whatever it was. And it just came out sideways on my daughter. It wasn't until I did my Crucible Weekend and have learned to own and manage my anger. And I certainly don't do it perfectly, but I try. But most of the time now I can be direct and clean. If I'm angry at my wife, I can speak that to her. I have a group that I'm in where I can process stuff if I'm angry with someone who it's not safe to directly interact with. I can process that with them. Yeah, that's the basic story.
And so have you gotten also better at identifying your anger quicker? You know, when you were talking about identifying your anger in your body, then identifying really where is the anger directed to, and then finding a way to express it cleanly. It sounds like you've gotten better and better. Is that just through practice? Is that through?
Yeah, it's through first intention about being aware of it, right? I'm
right.
Intending to be conscious of it. It's through knowing the signs. Like I know for me, I'm a jaw clencher. So sometimes, you know, if I just notice I'm clenching my jaw, I immediately then think, well, okay, what am I angry about? What, you know, I'm carrying some anger. What's that about? What's going on? Or I'll notice my neck is all tense, and I'll just start questioning, what's that about? So yeah, it's an intention to be conscious of it and not stuff it, and this awareness of the physical signs of it.
And have other people, because they've been around you long enough now, have they been able to go, Bob, you're clenching your jaw? Have they mentioned that kind of stuff?
That one's pretty hard to see. More, they will notice if still a sideways comment comes out. But that's pretty rare. Mostly what they'll get is just direct interaction with me on it if I'm angry about something.
That's great. Well, and that begs a side question too. You talked about being in a basically safe or open place to share your anger too. How do I discern if that person can take my clean anger, you know?
Yeah, that's tough. It's, you know, the big question is, are they open to looking at themselves, right? Because if you're going to them with your anger, it's not just about saying I'm angry. You have some issue with them, some boundary you want to set, some way that they're violating your boundary, perhaps, that you know, so you're bringing an issue to them that you're angry about. And are they the kind of person that's open to hear that issue and look at themselves? And you just learn that about people over time, whether it's a boss, a coworker, etc. Some people just aren't in a place where they're open for that. And then you have to find someplace else to process it.
Yeah, right. I was going to say that to find that place is important. And so you've talked about Crucible Project as helping on an initial weekend, uncover anger issues. Talked about being in a small group with other men, being a place that you can do that and share your anger. If a person has not done a Crucible Weekend, obviously we always recommend that they do one. But what are other ways, or what are ways that either I can engage with the Crucible Project to help me discover that, how I deal with anger, and even outside of the Crucible Project, what are ways that I can start to uncover this?
Sure. So within the Crucible Project, certainly I'd recommend everyone do our initial weekend. We now offer some groups, exploration groups, for people that have not yet done one of our weekends. So that's certainly a place to look at your feelings and begin to get in touch with them and learn how to process them. We also have coaches within the Crucible Project that are skilled at helping people process through any of the difficult emotions, anger, fear, sadness. So that's certainly an option. Outside of Crucible, certainly, therapists, counselors can help. Sometimes it's just finding that safe friend who is able to hear your anger and not be scared by it, and help you talk through it, help you process through it.
Any other input that you would want our listeners to know about anger that you don't feel like we've covered?
I would offer just an encouragement to everyone who hears this to get in touch with their anger and learn to use it in a positive way. This world, your family needs your anger because there's so much injustice, there's so much wrong with the world. The world needs you to take action, and that's fueled by your anger. So even if you feel like you've got your anger under control, if I'll do air quotes,
Sure.
And you are missing out on a part of who God created you to be if you are not connecting with your anger and then using that to fuel you taking action in this world to bring his kingdom.
Well said. Thanks for being with us today, and look forward to future episodes when we have you on again talking about other topics. Thanks, Bob.
Yeah, you're welcome, Tim. Thanks.
For more information about our weekends, please go to thecrucibleproject.org. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Rate and review wherever you are listening, and subscribe on your preferred podcast platform. Also, don't forget to check out myjourney2.com for your free 2-week trial. That's myjourneyto.com. Thank you for listening.